here. I want to talk to you about assessing the assets and building your team. But before we can talk about those assets and assessing them, let's talk about what it means to be a team. If you think about other professions, and for example, the medical profession, and we long thought of the lone doctor that traveled to the various people to care for them, and everything they needed, it didn't matter what they had, was in his magic bag, his tool bag. And we're still kind of playing victim to this silver bullet in this tool bag that's supposed to cure everything in our classrooms. And in fact, we've let Hollywood tell our story as educators and historians. Whether it's Mr. Holland's opus, it's the artisan model that Kaylani was just talking to us about, and I'm tired of waiting for Superman. But in fact, when we look at the isolation and the nature of the profession that we're in, it's really quite problematic when you think about how do we get to the point of collaborating and what does that look like. When we take a look at those that talk about reforming education, they talk about maybe we need longer school days and we need longer school hours. But in fact, when we look at it, education in America, the teachers are in the classroom longer than any other country. And it doesn't matter whether you're looking at elementary or secondary. So let's talk about reforms versus this idea of capacity building. With reforms, the expertise resides outside of the system. And in fact, we're allowing the expertise to come from people that aren't even in education at all. They're in the business, they're in the military, and they are putting those changes upon us versus building the capacity within system and being flexible and working with students and adapting as we go along. And if we look at the goals around reform efforts, it's about replicating and pushing them forward. So we've been throwing around this word collaboration. It's important that we talk about successes and failures, that we have time to those things, that we have shared leadership. Remember that image that Kaylani just showed us with the mission statement. And engaging in the hard conversation. Again, look at other professions and how many of the people in the law profession are moving to larger law firms instead of the individual attorney because it's much more complex. There is no system much more complex than what we work in right now. When we talk about making our practices public, it's about having time to observe and spending time in our classrooms, talking about the actual student learning happening in those classrooms, looking at evidence, not the warm and fuzzy conversation that we've been talking about. When we look at the medical profession, they make it a common practice, whether it's surgical domes in their facilities. We have the opportunity in a few schools to do school and classroom walkthroughs. The medical profession, you have these bedside discussions where we're actually teaching the interns about the people that they are working with. When we think about this notion of shared agreements around our learning, it's about focusing on improving the student learning, having common agreements around what do we think quality instruction looks like and how do we assess it. So when this looks like capacity building, these are commitments. It may be involving many in the school improvement planning process. It may be systems that are using portfolios. But we cannot call it a capacity building model when we're operating under compliance models. So when we look at maintaining an inquiry stance, it's about having clear goals, asking questions specifically about the student learning, reflecting on those things, and bringing in appropriate expertise when we need it. But the expertise resides in the system. Let us not forget that. So the universities are doing a great job of building incubators. The problem is, who are we inviting into the incubators? Scientists, business people. You don't see incubators for educators and nice facilities being built for those. When we talk about using evidence, it's this notion of grounding our work in student learning, using multiple sources of data, and looking at that student work together and deciding what will our actions be based on what we're seeing at the time. And so, again, in the medical profession, you see things like teaching rounds, and you're looking at multiple sources of information. We're starting to see glimpses of data teams, more bad examples than good examples, let's just admit it. But we need the opportunity to look at patterns across our students' work. And finally, what's the role of the system in all this? We have to have dedicated time to do this. You can't just simply say we're going to do it, and because we've deemed that we're going to implement it, it will happen. Leadership support and the ability to take risks when we're doing this kind of work. Here are examples of what not to do. I don't even have to read you the legend on this school calendar. I bet you can tell exactly what the professional development days in their calendar. Nowhere in the medical profession does the surgeon operate all day long and then get together with his or her peers to talk about how it went on that day, to wait the whole week, to wait the whole thing. If you want to take the next steps yourself and you're wondering about these big ideas, go to the Literacy and Learning Exchange. Put your group on the map. Take the asset inventory yourself. I guarantee you, you're going to have an interesting discussion.